On the afternoon of November 24th, 1971, a man in a dark suit and sunglasses walked up to the Northwest Orient Airlines ticket counter at Portland International Airport in Oregon. He bought a one-way ticket to Seattle. He paid cash. He gave his name as Dan Cooper. He looked like a businessman. He looked like any one of 1,000 ordinary men passing through an airport on the day before Thanksgiving. Nobody looked twice at him. Nobody remembered anything particularly unusual about him. He boarded the plane. He took his seat. He ordered a bourbon and soda. And then he passed a note to the flight attendant. What happened in the next several hours became one of the most extraordinary and baffling events in American aviation history. A hijacking unlike any other before or since. A ransom paid, a parachute strapped on, a jump into the darkness over the forests of the Pacific Northwest, and then nothing. No confirmed sighting, no body, no parachute, no trace of the man or the money. D.B. Cooper walked onto a plane in Portland, Oregon in 1971 and vanished from the face of the earth. And more than 50 years later, not a single law enforcement agency in the world can tell you with certainty who he was, whether he survived, or where he went. This is the only unsolved case of air piracy in American aviation history. And it starts with a note. The flight attendant's name was Florence Schaffner. She was working Flight 305 from Portland to Seattle on the afternoon of November 24th, 1971. It was a short flight, about 30 minutes in the air. The plane was a Boeing 727. There were 36 passengers on board. The man in seat 18C caught her attention when he passed her the note. Flight attendants in that era received notes from passengers occasionally, sometimes containing personal messages or phone numbers. Florence initially tucked the note into her pocket without reading it. The man leaned toward her. He told her she should read it. She read it. The note told her that he had a bomb. Florence approached him. He opened his briefcase slightly, just enough for her to see inside. She later described seeing red cylinders, wires, and a large battery. Whether it was a real bomb or an elaborate prop has never been determined. But in that moment, on that plane, Florence Schaffner had no reason to believe it was anything other than exactly what he said it was. He told her his demands. $200,000 in negotiable American currency, 4 parachutes, 2 primary, and 2 reserve. A fuel truck standing by in Seattle to refuel the aircraft upon landing. He told her to have the airline contact the authorities and meet his demands. He told her he wanted everyone to remain calm. He was polite. He was quiet. He was completely in control of himself and of the situation. Florence took the note to the cockpit. The pilots radioed ahead to Seattle. The airline and law enforcement were notified. The decision was made at the executive level of Northwest Orient Airlines to comply with the demands. The plane circled Seattle for approximately 2 hours while the money was gathered and the parachutes were obtained. During that time, Cooper sat in his seat, drank his bourbon, and waited. Passengers were told there was a mechanical issue. Most of them had no idea what was actually happening on that aircraft. The money was ready. It was $200,000 in $20 bills. Before the cash was handed over, the FBI photographed every single bill and recorded every serial number. If Cooper ever tried to spend that money, they would know. The parachutes were delivered. 4 of them, as requested, 2 primary and 2 reserve. When the plane landed in Seattle, Cooper allowed all 36 passengers and 2 of the flight attendants to disembark. He kept the pilots, 1 remaining flight attendant, and a flight operations officer on board. He collected the money, he examined the parachutes, and then he gave new instructions. He wanted to fly to Mexico City. He specified a particular route. He specified that the plane fly at a low altitude, no higher than 10,000 feet. He specified that the landing gear remain down and the flaps be set at 15 degrees, a configuration that would slow the aircraft significantly. He specified a speed of no more than 150 knots. These were not the demands of someone who didn't know what they were doing. The specific altitude, the speed, the flap configuration. Investigators noted immediately that these instructions suggested someone with knowledge of aviation, of parachuting, or both. A fuel stop was made in Reno, Nevada. The plane took off again, heading south. Somewhere over the wilderness of southwestern Washington state, at approximately 8 p.m. on the night of November 24th, 1971, D.B. Cooper strapped on a parachute, tied the bag of money to himself, opened the rear air stair of the Boeing 727, and jumped. The crew felt the change in air pressure. They knew he was gone. When the plane landed and was searched, Cooper was not on board. The 2 reserve parachutes were still there. He had taken the 2 primary chutes and the money. He had jumped into a dark November night over the forests of the Pacific Northwest, in an area of dense wilderness, in temperatures well below freezing, with $200,000 strapped to his body. And he was never seen again. The search began immediately. The FBI launched one of the most extensive manhunts in its history. The area of the probable jump zone was identified based on the flight path and the timing of the crew's observations. It covered a vast stretch of wilderness in southwestern Washington, heavily forested terrain crossed by rivers and ravines, remote and brutal in the way that the Pacific Northwest wilderness can be. Ground teams searched. Aircraft covered the area from above. The investigation spread outward, following every possible lead. They found nothing. Not a parachute. Not a piece of clothing. Not a footprint in the mud near any of the rivers that crossed the jump zone. Not a single piece of physical evidence to confirm that D.B. Cooper had ever touched the ground. In the months and years that followed, the FBI pursued thousands of leads. Tips came in from across the country. Hundreds of individuals were identified as potential suspects and investigated. Ex-military men with parachute training, former pilots, known criminals with similar physical descriptions. None of them could be confirmed as Cooper. The physical description provided by the flight crew was consistent, but not particularly distinctive. A white male, mid-40s, approximately 5 feet 10 inches tall, around 170 pounds, dark hair, wearing a dark business suit, a black tie with a mother-of-pearl tie clip, and dark sunglasses. He spoke in a calm, measured way. He was polite. He did not appear nervous. That description fit a substantial portion of the American male population in 1971. For nearly a decade after the hijacking, the money remained the best hope of solving the case. Every $20 bill Cooper had taken was documented. The serial numbers were distributed to banks. Law enforcement watched for the bills to surface. Every significant cash transaction involving $20 bills in the Pacific Northwest was scrutinized for years. Not a single bill from the ransom appeared in circulation. Not one. Until 1980. On February 10th, 1980, a boy named Brian Ingram was on a family camping trip along the banks of the Columbia River near Vancouver, Washington. He was digging in the sand along the riverbank when his fingers found something. 3 bundles of deteriorating $20 bills. The bills were checked against the recorded serial numbers from the D.B. Cooper ransom. They matched. 294 bills. Approximately $5,800 of the original $200,000. The bills were decayed and partially disintegrated, consistent with years of exposure to water and sediment. They had clearly been in or near the river for a significant period of time. Their discovery raised as many questions as it answered. The location where they were found was not entirely consistent with the expected drop zone. The bills had clearly been in the river or near it, but how they got there, whether they fell from Cooper during the jump, whether they washed downstream from somewhere else, whether Cooper had been near that area at some point after the jump, could not be determined. No other bills from the ransom have ever been found. No other physical evidence connected to D.B. Cooper has ever been definitively identified. Over the decades, dozens of suspects have been named, investigated, and ultimately cleared or left unresolved. One of the most seriously considered was a man named Richard Floyd McCoy Jr. McCoy hijacked a United Airlines flight in 1972, just months after the Cooper hijacking, using a nearly identical method. He demanded $500,000 and 4 parachutes. He jumped from the aircraft over Utah. He was caught shortly afterward when some of the ransom money was found at his home. McCoy matched the physical description of Cooper reasonably well. He had military parachute training. The similarities between his hijacking and Cooper's were striking. The FBI investigated McCoy seriously as a Cooper suspect. They ultimately concluded he was not the same man, based on testimony from the flight crew who said McCoy did not match Cooper closely enough in person. McCoy was convicted for his own hijacking, escaped from prison in 1974, and was killed in a confrontation with FBI agents shortly thereafter. Another significant suspect emerged decades later through the work of a retired FBI agent named Larry Carr, who reopened the investigation in 2007 and pursued new leads with fresh energy. Several individuals were identified through genealogical research and behavioral analysis. None were conclusively confirmed. In 2016, after 45 years and over 1,000 identified suspects, the FBI announced that it was suspending active investigation of the D.B. Cooper case. Resources were being redirected. The case was not closed, but active investigative work was being put on hold. The file remains open. The case remains officially unsolved. And here's the question that has driven 50 years of speculation about this case. Did D.B. Cooper survive the jump? The conditions that night were brutal. The temperature at jump altitude was estimated at around 7 degrees Fahrenheit. The terrain below was dense Pacific Northwest forest, dark, rugged, and unforgiving. He jumped at night in November over wilderness, with no ground team, no lights below to guide him, and no way of knowing exactly where he would land. Most professional skydivers and military parachute experts who have analyzed the jump have expressed serious doubt that an untrained or even moderately trained jumper could have survived those conditions. The cold alone would have been dangerous. Landing in dense old-growth forest at night without being able to see the ground presents an enormous risk of severe injury or death. But Cooper chose the parachutes deliberately. He asked for 4 and took 2 primary chutes. He knew the difference between a primary and a reserve. He knew what configuration he wanted the aircraft in to make the jump survivable. He had clearly thought about this, whether that knowledge was enough to get him safely to the ground, walk out of the wilderness, and disappear into American life under a new identity, or whether it was enough to get him off the plane, but not enough to save him when he hit the tree line in the dark, is a question nobody has ever been able to answer. If he survived, he successfully evaded one of the most extensive manhunts in FBI history, never spent any of the money in a traceable way, and lived out the rest of his life with a secret that has become one of the most famous unsolved mysteries in American history. If he didn't survive, his body and the remaining money are somewhere in the wilderness of the Pacific Northwest, buried under decades of forest growth, undiscovered and possibly undiscoverable. Both possibilities are extraordinary. Both are entirely plausible. And that is why this case has never let go of the public imagination. There is something genuinely unique about the way people feel about D.B. Cooper compared to almost any other criminal case. He did not hurt anyone. Nobody on that plane was physically harmed. The flight crew described him as calm and even courteous throughout the ordeal. He let the passengers go before doing anything else. He said please and thank you. He robbed an airline of $200,000, jumped out of a plane over the forests of Washington state, and disappeared. And somewhere in the American imagination, that story landed differently than most crime stories land. There's almost an admiration that has attached itself to the legend of D.B. Cooper. The audacity of it, the sheer improbability of it, the fact that he appears to have simply gotten away with it. He became a folk hero of sorts. Songs were written about him. Films were made. Books, documentaries. An entire subculture of researchers and investigators devoted years of their lives to finding him. He is the only hijacker in American aviation history who was never caught. The only one. The case of D.B. Cooper remains officially open with the FBI. If you believe you have information about the identity of D.B. Cooper, the FBI still accepts tips. The case file has never been formally closed. Somewhere out there may be someone who knows the truth. A family member who found something years ago and said nothing. An old friend who heard a story that didn't add up. Someone who knew a man who disappeared around Thanksgiving of 1971 and never quite explained where he had been. The truth about D.B. Cooper is out there. It has just been waiting 50 years for someone to bring it forward. That is the case of D.B. Cooper. The businessman who wasn't a businessman. The hijacker who vanished into the sky. Drop your theories in the comments. Do you think he survived the jump? Do you have a suspect in mind? Do you think the money found on the Columbia River tells us something about what happened to him? And if you've got an unsolved case you think we should cover next, leave it in the comments. Some of the best cases come from people who've been sitting on a story they can't stop thinking about. We're the Unsolved Vault. We'll be back with a new case very soon. Don't go far.